It will fly out, you won't catch it. The main charm of Maria Zakharova is her incredible charisma and language gift. She's not just the voice of Russian diplomacy, but her main media face, who does not go into her pocket for a word. Her phrases instantly go to the people. She can leave her opponent harshly and shine in subtle irony. At the same time, Zakharova is a multifaceted personality who writes poetry, dances kalinka, and admits that her main fear is. It is precisely this unique blend of unwavering principles, radiant humor, and sharp, lightning-fast intelligence that elevates her beyond the realm of diplomacy, making her truly a remarkable star. Let's start, as they say, first directly from birth, because Masha's unique birthday is Christmas. At what age did you realize you were born? On Christmas Eve?
Well, it's of course Catholic Christmas on December 4th. I want to say that my mother is an art critic and I grew up in the Pushkin Museum in the literal sense of the word, but I think the situation is familiar to many, especially before there were no nannies. My grandmother was also all working in my case. One of them lived outside the city, so I was always taken as if to work. That is this, and by the way, not just me. This was a fairly common story when children took jobs. Wherever they could take them, they gave them an album or books or lessons. I was taken to a museum. I grew up in a museum in the truest sense of the word. For me, the world of art is not about, so to speak, the era of decadent Silver Age. Or for me, the world of art is the world that surrounded me from the Egyptian halls to the Greek courtyard. I don't know there. Copies of Michelangelo's works by David to the tour desk, naturally buffet, were without it. And of course, this amazing atmospheric space of the Pushkin Museum, I mean at the Volkonka of fine arts. Accordingly, the theme of Christmas and everything related to it did not come to me from probably the family history of Noé, with a visa, with religious traditions, rituals, customs, and through art, because this topic was, of course, very interesting, so to speak. Told in the Pushkin Museum and in the lecture hall and during excursions, given the rich collection of medieval paintings and paintings Renaissance, and of course the whole of the Middle Ages, the whole of the Renaissance. One way or another, this topic was everywhere and everywhere, so I would say that theoretically I knew about it. Well, literally right away, but from, as it were, the sphere of art and the world culture. And as for touch in such an everyday sense, here it is. Well, relatively speaking, the surrounding world unrelated to art, I think it came when I was already a teenager. We were in China with our parents. It was already high school, and gradually, little by little.
Let me clarify, there were 2 visits.
Yes, it was an all-parents drive because...
One is early enough.
What did you finish, huh?
That.
Yes, I was about 14, 15 years old, and this is respectively one half 90, and through mass culture, through hotel decoration elements, so to speak, of Western and pop art and the West. On some such visual paraphernalia, they also came to China. And then I began to see all the Christmas decorations, which we didn't yet have at that time. And after all, they were such Western Christian traditions with their stylistics, with their kind. It was noted interestingly, and this was the second contact with this topic, well, then it was already mine. As if such church-going was already conscious after school at the institute.
This photo was not taken by the museum.
This photo that we had on Dutch. She was small, by the way. This photo is on the passport.
Come on.
Well, of course, well, I think it was a photo on...
Passport photos were taken together.
Joint. Well, for some kind of documents, that is. Is this a photo? For joint documents, that period they were made, including these, as far as I remember. And this little one stood. Why am I still so sure about this? We had this small photo. Yeah, and she was standing at our grandmother's dacha. I really love this picture. I remember this dress, by the way. Mine was this orange-pink color, more orange.
Masha looks quite serious here.
Chiseled. I can't tell you that I'm very serious, I'm not here. No, it's in this. There's no such, intentional seriousness. There's definitely no puffiness.
Got it.
Such, even I would say slight interest. I would say yes, slight interest.
Both are stunning.
Well, mom, yeah, definitely mom. She just fought right off the bat.
Yes.
Yes, that's a fact.
Uh-huh.
Then there was no concept of any kind of photo modeling as some kind of common phenomenon, this was still a special cast.
Uh-huh.
It was a special world, but photographers were chasing my mother. I just remember her. She was also engaged in journalism, and she wrote articles. She prepared materials for different magazines, and therefore came into contact with photographers, professionals who had to shoot some items for her materials. And they photographed different objects, but it seems to me that they really wanted to photograph her too. I remember that very well.
Who did you aspire to be at that time?
Everything was very interesting. I don't understand why I have to choose one thing. I thought this was the age, a period reflected in the photo up to around 65 and 66, as we'd reached China for the first time. Quite a remarkable tale. Exactly on December 24th, that is my birthday when I turned 6 years old. So we flew to Beijing, and this is also connected with the story of both dad and very clearly with mom, because we arrived. We were brought to the embassy in winter, and winter in China. The early 80s are not winter in China now, but by all accounts. Well, first of all, this is, of course, a completely different decoration of the city, a different color. Now, in the sense of illumination, yes, not such cars, advertisements, well, the screen is whatever you want. And then these are, of course, such red stripes of some slogans, political and practically no decoration, because there was no tradition of decorations for the New Year. Chinese traditional New Year was after the official one, so to speak. The shock New Year is, as a rule, February, well, plus or minus, since the half moon phase is calculated, it has a floating date, but it's definitely there a month or after the New Year, somewhere in a few weeks. Accordingly, until the New Year, everything was extremely laconic from the point of view of the surrounding reality in the city of Beijing. But the main thing is something else. The main thing is that the climate was different. Now you can see snow. This is now, even if it is not as fluffy as in Moscow and global.
Warming is a myth?
No, it wasn't there. It was a little about something else. It was about what they were. It wasn't snow, it was sand. It was sandy winds, that is, it was very cold. Yeah, and that cold wasn't from our frost. It was cold from the icy wind that was blowing here from the Gobi Desert. And it was blowing with sand, And given the certain geographical location of Beijing, well, it seems to be more in the lowlands, but it all settled there. Plus add the smell of coal, and not only the smell, but these particles of charcoal with which the whole city was heated, and it was generally a special atmosphere, such a half-haze wind. That is, if there was wind, then you could see the sky, but it was wild, cold, and the sand hit directly in the eyes, and not only in the eyes, he just gritted his teeth. If there was no wind, then such a haze was a haze. And this is the aroma of charcoal because I perceived it precisely as the aroma of and therefore everything was gray, there was no snow everywhere, this sand, and we arrive on December 24th, we get off the plane. Everything is generally not clear, and people in Beijing then wore blue, green, black, brown, gray clothes, very similar to uniforms. Such half French. Why do men and women have And such, well, I would call them in Russian zipuna, in Chinese they had a special name. Such picors, such cotton coats, large scale, so big, and we come. My birthday is ruined, there is no New Year's usual, I am of course shocked. We were taken to the embassy, and then we were taken to a store for foreigners to buy groceries, given some little money to buy something to eat.
Uh-huh.
And we went through this store. This store was friendship several floors.
Like our birch tree.
Yes.
Birch, after all, it was more specialized, closed this plus or minus wider in context.
Slept for what?
This is a very interesting question. Thank you for this. We bought it for yuan. These are foreign because the currency, I mean Chinese yuan.
E.
I realized that at that time there were two hypostases. One, this is la minbi, the so-called people's money. These are minbi. They have remained until now. And there were also yuan, which are called huaqiao, that is, as it were, convertible Chinese currency, which was issued to foreigners. But at the same time, it was not exactly checks because we could not trade with checks. But this kind of hybrid currency, but at the same time yuan, which was called in vaihoti, you could pay with them somewhere. So this is in general a similar story, plus or minus, but the store was large. There were a lot of tourists there, and the diplomatic corps, there were some representatives, so to speak, of the local community. And we went through the grocery store, the grocery floor, and further, and on one of the floors, we saw these very Chinese traditional works of art. In essence, that is, they are not just souvenirs. And these were some embroidery. It was some kind of china. Well, it's as if you fell into a fairy tale by Anderson the Nightingale. Something was incredible. They saw it. Where, well, Peterhof, yes, in the Catherine Palace, well, something like that, yes. And it's all on the shelves. These are all enamels. These are all some kind of double-sided screens, painted, embroidered. And by this moment, given that I read a lot and listened to fairy tales, of course, how else? But Nikita girls, well, you can say border ones, because they were also dissected through Western fairy tales as the same nightingale. For some reason, it's the most fabulous thing for me that if I could even imagine the most magical, the most desirable thing in my life, it was a fan. First of all, it is a female attribute.
Yes, yes.
But on the other hand, this is some kind of attribute. It's an extraordinary and unconventional life, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And dear friend, I have observed these deeply held beliefs displayed prominently on shelves for countless years.
Again.
6 years, this is my day.
Yes, yes.
And I find myself entranced, standing before a strikingly massive red fan that seemed to resonate profoundly with me. Its dimensions appeared to measure under 40 centimeters, and though lightweight, the fiery red color captivated me. At its core, a pink peony adorned the vibrant centerpiece, while a delicate silk ribbon graced the top. In many Chinese traditions, particularly those in dance, silk ribbons are customary components that add grace and depth to their movements.
They're like Spaniards. They dance with fans too, right?
Dancing. Dance, as an essential, brings vitality and charm to the art form. Understandably, I stood there, utterly spellbound, amid its magnificence, this stunning marvel within close reach. It never once crossed my mind that such splendor could belong to me, as such wondrous scenarios often feel far beyond attainable.
A museum thing.
Big.
Yes.
And mom goes, and this is how much they gave us for food. She puts all this money on this fan and gives it to me for my birthday. Now, this fan is edged with you. It is somewhat dented by life and battered for obvious reasons, because nothing has ever happened to it in life. But now it, so to speak, hangs on the wall as a real artifact. In our life and accompanying us, the person who brought us to this store and showed us, I tell him, what are you doing to my mother? Mom, this is my child's birthday. It's not even her dream. So it was impossible to dream of such beauty. This is one day in another country. She must open the doors to a new world through culture, through art. She says, these are two chickens. She says, well, for the price, it's two chickens. This, of course, is part of it I didn't perceive, but I came out of there in complete shock with an absolute treasure. But it's interesting what I think. Two miracles happened that day. We were already received, so to speak, by senior embassy officials who, well, this is such a tradition. Relatively speaking, such direct leadership from that accepted us only when the people who arrived were already older than us. Those who lived in China had previously had business trips to others, and I'm coming with my mom and dad. They always took it with them. On the same birthday, this lady is the diplomat's wife. She looks at me, and after the flight, I'm in a new country, and says, well, how are you doing? And I say, I'm doing very well. Today is my birthday. I'm such that you say Mashenka, and comes up, opens some kind of locker, and yes, this little figurine was a red fish. And on it is a little boy made of clay. A little clay, the toy is not a whistle, but it is very similar to it and gives it to me. I mean, I get it, thank you. Then we go home with this little clay toy, and it turned out to be not just a fish, but a carp, and not just a carp, eh? A well-wishing carp, and not just a boy, but a boy who in Chinese culture was associated with offspring, old dreams, and so on. A small collection began, well, basically a family collection of Chinese folk toys, and after we returned from one business trip. In the Pushkin Museum, where my mother worked for 87, 88 years, an exhibition was held. So it was called My Chinese Toy, and there was Mom's. The collection was a breakthrough. 2/2/80, Gorbachev's Far Eastern speech was just heard saying that we need to open up and we need to build relations. The speech is long awaited for many who anticipated, so to speak, finally the discovery. This direction associated with China and Asia, given what dramatic events our countries experienced, first such incredible love 50, then a sharp decline in cooling up to.
Damansky.
Well, he started the bike, and then yes. And of course, given that my neighbors and that these are common borders and such a wealth of opportunities, such potential for relations, this of course was long awaited. And these were the first swallows of my mom's articles in various art magazines. Asia and Africa, of course, she wrote from China, she wrote to Chinese culture, and then such a large real bird, it was no longer a swallow. There was this exhibition in the center of Moscow at the Pushkin Museum of Fine Arts of Western Art. Irina Alexandrovna, Antona, but with her incredible foresight and, of course, professionalism, she organized this exhibition for us now. Yes, despite the fact that there are millions of galleries, opportunities, and no exhibitions, but still, as many say, we are opening ourselves up. China is normal, yes, 1/4 of the 21st century, and it was the end of the 80s, and the Museum of Western Art provided its platform so that our public, and first of all children, could learn through objects of folk art. Also, by the way, they could. Tell me, what do you have here? On the one hand, Wang with Degas. On the other hand, the Fayum portrait with Egyptian mummies is a work. Yes, indeed, it is either art or artifacts that have stood the test of time. But here are the modern ones. It was Chinese folk art that they could show, and I think they said, but it was really brilliant to hold this exhibition and open it to a large number of people. And a colossal number of people saw the exhibition. I mean, the audience was huge for a few months. And to talk about this country, on the one hand, closed with such a mysterious, but at the same time with such an ancient culture through folk art. It was really great. That's how it all started.
Do you celebrate Chinese New Year in your family?
Well, we're not just celebrating because, yes, we know him well.
Yes.
Okay, I answer, well, we don't mark it properly. Traditionally, we sometimes take Chinese food home, or as a rule, we don't go to a Chinese restaurant because everything there is already oversaturated in advance. There is never an opportunity to book anything. So sometimes we just order Chinese food. And sometimes we combine it with some other events. We just know this holiday mom through our collection, because what is Chinese New Year? How is it different from our Our New Year is firstly a calendar event with a set date. And one way or another with quite such a very interesting combination of different traditions. Here you have a tradition that seems to have come from, so to speak, Christianity, religion, yoga. Well, how were we able to adapt it to us? Yes, it seems like it's Christmas. Well, it seems like it's for the new year, so to speak. This tradition was first broken, then restored in this capacity. And of course, the family tradition associated with it, family circle with gifts, and of course with an additional account of the tradition of such modern pop culture, but already in general, lights, television, fireworks in some places, visits in some places, well, something like this. Chinese traditional New Year is a colossal layer of ancient traditions, a colossal set of good wishes, and everything fell behind to decorating the entrance, gifts, various wishes. All this is associated with the most ancient symbolism, so we know it, and I generally have such a dissertation.
Of course, yes, I just wanted to...
So this is not a celebration, it is a kind of tribute to what is part, in general, of the history of our knowledge of China.
And according to the sign of the zodiac, it matters when you are from. You study a person, or you hire or fire him to work there, these moments are never taken into account.
I'm not...
We reject prophecies altogether.
No, these are different things. Yes, regarding the question of how to hire and how to conduct an interview.
Well, the city I am...
Excuse me, that's how many years I've been working, how many years in general. Only now, for the first time, have I heard such a formulation of the question regarding how our personnel policy is implemented. And I imagined it for a second, and I said that there were them. Fish cancer is not, well, really never, that's all that.
The Chinese horoscope is everything.
That said, well, never mind, it's never in my life. I didn't even specify how much.
Here you are for them.
I know, you know, aspects only in cases where we are talking about, well, old friends, comrades with whom we have been there from the institute bench together, well, in general, and simply through this one. Well, such friendly communication is enough, then you know about it. Never in my life did I not include anything, did not clarify, did not ask, but always only official characteristics or biographical data. The number of languages for me is much more representative in this sense. Where a person studied, what languages he knows, what is interesting, and most importantly, what experience. This is the experience of a person with whom he would like to share that he is a calling card in terms of something.
This is very important, and there is no language I think he's delaying.
Fingerprints of linguistic studies exist for sure.
I immediately see it differently. I immediately see what a person is interested in. Well, here's a conditional question. You will sneeze with whom and when and what you learned, and so on. But as for horoscopes as phenomena, well, that's a different story. You can read here and look again. If you take Chinese culture, it is directly related to the New Year. This is symbolism, this is a good wish, and so on and so forth. I understand that for the people of these countries, these peoples, these ethnic groups, this is a huge meaning, a huge layer and culture.
I now have a picture. I remember Maria Vladimirovna Zakharova in a red dress congratulating her on the New Year in Chinese for a long time.
The prompter read aloud.
Now it was a prompter. Probably yes, but before that, I congratulate you for the past few years. I have been doing this with pleasure, practically. Manezhnaya Square, Red Square, were next to it under the walls.
Uh-huh.
The Chinese New Year is unfolding in our Kremlin. The Chinese New Year festival is a joint project. Russia and China bring us a festival to the people, the Spring Festival, the same Chinese New Year. And in China, the Russian Maslenitsa is sent. And it's an amazing story. I saw a lot of skeptics. I would say a few skeptics, but in the professional, there were many skeptical people who said that no, it probably won't be interesting, very interesting and very educational and very friendly.
And
I think it is a wonderful story when our cities exchange such very important and representative holidays for themselves. That's when we record. Congratulations were there, and red robes, when I remember there were, yes. And that's where we divert the soul, and there all this matter is already in live communication.
Chinese is tonal, making it easy to mess up. There's even a term called huaqiao.
Yes.
I misunderstood initially, but yes, I learned about toning. I still appreciate it here. An explanation is distinct from what the diaspora represents. Feelings within the diaspora. What is huaqiao exactly?
Well, we won't have enough now. Of course, there is no airtime. That's rude, one might say. The Chinese diaspora abroad can be said to be Chinese immigration, but it is definite. I think that it is still a socio-cultural phenomenon in the life of China, which was associated with certain historical events. That is, it is Chinese who live abroad, but it is still used. This is the term in a certain historical connotation. That is, these are not those Chinese who are now directly leaving to work in the framework of any projects or work for any foreign companies. These are still more related to the 20th century concepts. At least that's what my Chinese teachers told me, that please don't confuse me.
The fact is that I just met a lot of young Chinese here in America who didn't say a word.
Yes.
remarkably, some Mandarin speakers communicate almost exclusively in English.
What?
It seems that they are both Chinese, and all of them.
One of my visas is with the American mission in New York. Back then, Ash A. was deputy press secretary at the UN. The press secretary at the time was Rigger Nell, who had an interesting career afterward.
Yeah.
Ben Chang, an ethnic Chinese who didn't know Chinese, married him. It was fascinating how my colleague from the Chinese mission, the press secretary, and I conversed in Chinese, while he, a uniquely creative Chinese individual, requested translations to English, urging us, ladies, bring it to English. This situation was captivating. Regrettably, I cannot comment further, albeit without any emotional nuance. Nonetheless, it presents itself as a noteworthy phenomenon.
Always keep in mind their immense pride in their Chinese heritage. They firmly underline their identity and let it be known, we are from China and we take pride in that.
Either differently, each family has its own history. I will never draw a line and say that in principle it is like this, or that is why many keep the language, many who come. Well, in particular, in the States and other countries, they do not speak any other language at all except Chinese. And some who come as children in different ways, come either with their families or the children who are adopted do not speak Chinese. Although Chinese adoption abroad implies a connection to the homeland, they have entire programs when children who are fated are adopted. They come with their parents and get acquainted with their historical homeland from China.
Yeah, but interestingly, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs monitors the situation, which I simply empirically calculated in a banned social network.
Maybe it was such a simple coincidence, but it seems to me that many of our departing people are not talking about the relocants of the last wave, but those who left in the 90s for the Soviet ones.
These days, they are much more patriotic than people in their own circle. These are our strata. Well, that is, they classify them as Batniki. I just have this feeling it's wrong.
Vision. But you and I know this wonderful joke, I think you remember it, which seems to me to be relevant here more than anything else. When, well, a person dies and he goes to hell, well, he was never an exemplary person, an exemplary family man, an exemplary citizen will get him there right away.
Uh-huh.
And that means he's coming then, that everyone plays cards, fun, wine, casino, dominoes, at least in some way, this is for sure, of course. But you can see with one eye what heaven says, well, with just one eye, all the quiet people, they look at everything and suddenly once he's brought back to life, he lives his second half of life and is already approaching this very moment of his death. And he's definitely dying, falls, so to speak, into the other world. And they ask him, maybe we have any wishes before you are judged. He says, I don't need to judge me right away to hell. He says, right away to hell. You're sure I remember very well how fun and great it was to send him there right away. There he immediately falls into the cursed cauldron of lava. The skin begins to be peeled off, screams, groans, and suddenly he, realizing what it is, shouts, just like last time I was here. It was so fun here. Why is it so terrible now that he is told? That's just it. How is tourism different from immigration? That's when people live there, that's exactly how. Well, maybe citizens or with a residence permit, well, they don't just see gloss on the permanent. They don't see what they want to see or what they've been told. Here, from the wrapper, from the window, they already see everything as it is. Yeah, I can give a huge number of examples of this difference. I want to say more. Am I one of them, so to speak? Because then in 2005, I went on a business trip to New York. I went with approximately the same package of ideas about the fact that there is a West, that there are states. About me was enough. Well, I want to say that this is one of the moments of shock. Here are the shorts. There are shock, there are tragic moments, there are challenges to your life, and there are shocks that literally transform you. This was only an informal Security Council meeting, which is under the camera in a round table and everyone speaks in some benevolence. Now, by the way, there is nothing left of this benevolence either. And everyone was also surprised, how do we hear this inadequacy? And then there was absolute benevolence. Basically, they talked about human rights, about democracy, about, so to speak, a wonderful future. And I immediately ended up in this very consultative meeting hall that is where the informal meeting takes place. It is simply smaller than this huge hall. There is no public, there are no cameras, everyone sits at a non-round table. It is so slightly oval table, but the same spreads, and here there is a real one, you can say, in terms of size, and not tourism, so to speak, with elements of entertainment. And I didn't arrive, I left there. Well, it's just another person, and I stood there, and there are deputies sitting there, the rest of the delegation, recording, standing against the wall with headphones or without headphones. I'm at 203 Hanbuk. I just went out there. I couldn't come to my senses. I didn't believe what I was hearing because they usually say things close to who they really are.
Case. And so I have the feeling that many current relocants very much regret that they left in 22 years. And here there are different points of view in our society. Call back, I'm talking about iconic figures and people's artists, honored artists who call them in sight and in hearing, or just let him move, or on the contrary, make a choice and sit there, just like right here, if the person did not help with the problem.
Him.
Statements. Close your eyes to everything and let him come, or encourage you, vice versa.
I would only return the question to the beginning.
Yes.
Indeed, that one. Many of them regret or repent there or understand what was done wrong. I would add many who have returned a long time ago.
That's right, here's the pate.
This is once.
That's yes.
As people, I cannot say that there are a lot of them, but there are people who make this final choice several times a year based on how the situation develops on the ground, and we have seen them too. Now to the question of whether to call or not, well, how kind, how strange it is to even talk about this and what you were chasing. Well, it was probably possible to call when they drove them away or said something, or if they asked at that moment, tell us to leave or stay. Well, like now, some kind of communication would also be necessary because they didn't ask. And in my opinion, they don't ask who wanted to do it, who wanted to come back. Isn't that true?
Things are the same as before when they left.
No, Zhenya, that's right.
It is.
This is important.
But context matters, because when, say, I don't know, the same...
That if they ask, this is one conversation, it happens like this, and it happens like this, and it was like this. Here it is. We wanted to clarify, this is one conversation, and when people have made this choice, well, maybe even now they will somehow figure it out within themselves. No, or you definitely need to say so, verbalize something, because this choice, I want to say again, people did it on their own, and when they started coming back, I don't remember anything that anyone started reproaching them, shaming them, or filming them. Many people themselves said, but we returned, or did not say, but so to speak, we returned and said that now we are here. Yes, people actually who left or returned, they did not hide much. From what they felt, they literally deliberately visualized in their social networks what secret meanings. Someone cursed, someone said that you are their position, someone said that the moment has finally come when they can say, for example, what are the secret meanings of man? Now, to be honest, I don't know anything about this situation and can't even comment on it. It's just that I'm not off topic. Yeah, well, I'm talking about many who have made their position absolutely clear. Not only that, OA was very worried. Did everyone see her? What are the secret meanings? Well, the phrase was said then. Now a person thinks to a friend. Well, that means probably he thinks to a friend. What is the search for secret meanings?
Okay, but this is your department, or is it still the prerogative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? When it comes to citizenship, let's say, when a person openly helps our general military enemy, when he buys their, I don't know. The vehicles for BSY are primarily related to military purposes.
I would not plan so much a military opponent for my friend, because if you read NATO doctrinal documents or listen to what all sorts of presidents of Western European countries say, they call themselves opponents or they're military there or there, whatever. I was still a little more specific when it comes to direct sponsorship of terrorist activities. Here we have every day We see, and these are absolutely confirmed facts, these are not secret meanings, these are facts. Yes, when civilians are killed, when children are killed, and this is not accidental, but they deliberately choose buses with children, hostels with children, schools with children. Not long ago, I read another report by Maxim Grigoriev there. This is our public figure, a person who collects data, who talks to people who lived in the border regions in Kursk. In, well, the so-called new well, our traditional secondary regions. This is exactly what is directly called the extremist and tourist activities of the Kiev regime. Do you read it too? You open and read when the drone is aiming at it. The cameraman flies into an open window of a woman who is just cooking dinner. They're building a redoubt, and she's not driving an armored vehicle. She cooks dinner for her family and burns alive in front of the stove. We are talking about this sponsorship and support for this activity. Or when 21. This cannot be called a young man, this is a 17-year-old child. Listen, but these are children. It's true that children, no matter what category they are in, no matter how many passports they already have, what would they be? So to speak, they didn't pass the exams. But this is the same age that today we still qualify exactly like this when they are sleeping, and they are killed by 3 waves of shells. Understanding where they are flying, not because the geolocation marked or was marked as a military facility, but precisely because the geolocation pointed to a civilian children's facility and an object associated with the place where the children slept, because it wasn't just a college, it was in general. I really want to clarify those who love to show their civic position so much before, those who saw and felt so acutely the terrorist attacks in Paris. In Berlin, in the Middle East. Do they really not feel this pain now when giving concerts or publishing something, the materials on their pages? Why? These are their compatriots. These are people of the same culture, the same language, some of our heroes. Some, by the way, songs, they also really like the same songs. Why isn't that compassionate? Zhenya, tell me, maybe there is some meaning here. Or it simply doesn't exist, or this meaningless existence, or what to call it. That's what I have a question about.
It's simply double standards, no?
No double standard here. It's a concept in political science. Let me explain. Standard 1, you understand? It's like a sturgeon, which according to Bulgakov can only have one freshness. It's either fresh or it's not. The same with standards. Do you feel this pain? Do you understand that in this way you want to be involved, to somehow show your sympathy or not? But the main thing is something else. Why don't those who didn't know you have different things? It happens, it happens. Such tragedies that turn your life upside down, even when you don't know where that particular place is. The monstrosity of the story shocks people on different continents. Well, like, it could be that somewhere in a far, far away city with which you cannot be associated, nothing happened, disaster, tragedy of various kinds. And everything turns around, avatars change, memorial candles are lit, some songs are sung. And not only that, but there is also such socialization around this all. When children die who are clearly directly related to you, I call them these ties, these connotations, these threads. You don't feel anything. There is no need to look for any secret meanings, any double standards, and everything is clear. The only question that arises is why there is no need to cover up with these same memes about double standards, and there is no need to look for or go into some conspiracy theory or accuse others of conspiracy theory. Well, just ask a question. Tell me why again? Why this is how I know people who help and empathize silently? Well, then they also help and empathize in other cases. Silently, they feel this way. They don't consider it necessary to flip their avatars. I want to say these. I commented on a huge number of terrorist attacks, expressed sympathy and condolences, and did this. And politically, so to speak, established and also emotionally, humanly, from the bottom of my heart, I did not turn over the avatars. Why? Because I understand that I will start turning over my avatars and changing them. Well, then you will have to do something every day. I knew I couldn't do this every day. I did this to a friend, I wrote about it, I talked about it, I drew attention to it. I do not avoid the tragedy associated with my compatriots, with the people with whom we experience history together. Why these people? They do not find the strength in themselves, neither for photography, nor for words, nor for feelings. Not for financial, moral help is not always needed, only financial. Sometimes more important is morale, you know, like in 90 when a terrible challenge for our country. There were children who were sent to orphanages. These orphanages were poor, they were absolutely terrible, unmaintained places. And only thanks largely to the teams and educators. The children lived through these years there, and then the society woke up and came help, toys, a concert, and so on. And you know what happened then? It's amazing how you communicate there with some kind of orphanage, with some kind of an institution corresponding to Igor. With what help? Well, we only ask you very much, not material toys, but a lot. I say how they say it better. They will meet from the heart, come, talk, hold a master class, draw, go for a walk, move something. You understand that is, they expect and want different things, maybe different things from you, so there is no need to talk about secret meanings. There are no secret meanings. People have the right to ask the question, tell me, if you then so sympathized with the children of various foreign states in their distress, why are you here? Don't empathize with this, the same secret meaning here, just a direct question, and note something incredible. I don't even know, patience, even impatience, some incredible will of our people who don't even ask questions. And so they don't raise, so to speak, these questions in any way.
Sometimes the question is still asked on the same social networks, both prohibited and not prohibited, because, there is a saying that Rabinovich was either take off his cross or put on his panties, because when we have a person with the title of People's Artist, he has the title in the register of a foreign agent and declares, let's say, that if Ukraine, Israel will not win now, darkness will come to war, that is, desires the defeat of the country, the citizen that he is. The reaction must be either ignored or not.
There is no option here when it comes to supporting extremism or terrorism, and calls for murder based on ethnic national grounds or calls for murder in general should come into law, right?
Is there such a law?
Of course.
He works this one.
Of course, I can't tell you, as they say, for the whole of Odessa. All of Odessa is too big. Well, you understand the difference, we quote, and we believe that this is our common classic, and we have never humiliated anyone even over the years. Nothing was deleted or shared, yes, and you have more of this blood or that, but in fact a lot. We treated with great sympathy those who treated us that way, and there this is ideology. She was triumphant. Therefore, I will not say in favor of implementing the entire law in its entirety, but of course these laws are in this direction. They are certainly working.
Yes, but there's another perspective. For example, I watched an interview with Maria Zakharova, a famous blogger. And Maria Zakharova mentions the name of a cult Leningrad reporter, a brilliant journalist, the greatest scum of those in whom I know personally, and Maria Zakharova does not add. At the same time, talking to a blogger, what this person enters into sharply foreign agents, thereby violating the law. Isn't this overkill when it is required every time calling this or that foreign yant? Be sure to write and say that I am a foreign language.
I can.
So everyone knows too.
Yes. I want to say that I ask you to give the appropriate signature either before or after the broadcast, because sometimes there is a semi-controversy.
Here?
Sometimes it's about precise wording or emphasis, avoiding misguided phrasing or ambiguity. There is a law, and I follow it as much as possible in this sense at briefings, in our official communications, in elections, and so on.
Then it's just really politics then.
For this?
And you're breaking the law?
No, well, not for this. The media has every opportunity to fill this gap by making an appropriate shot. These are different things.
Here.
If do it intentionally and brag about it, and how would I it
Accurately define and brag about this, or do you not brag about it, or this question, so to speak, came out and was not meant here at all, as when there is already a law, then here you are substituting me. I was in Nizhny Novgorod at a forum.
This is what was said about this or that was discussed for a long time and a lot and debated. Well, for example, there is extremist symbolism, but how to watch, for example, what tapes?
And you need to talk, for example.
Look, we're human after all.
Yes.
Jen, sorry, please, I have a higher education.
Well, I'm a mathematician, right?
Well, this is a certain set of qualifications, as competencies say now. Although I sincerely believe that this word should be used, it is a unique number, it is a set of definite ones. Well, I don't know how to describe the characteristics. That is, you are taught to think, you are a mathematician, I am a diplomat, an information informant, someone is an artist, someone is a poet with a higher education than you. They teach you to think and find answers to different questions. When do you set, for example, the candidate minimum? Yes, despite the fact that we have different areas, history, again, exact sciences, humanities, and so on, but there is a certain set that you must give. Even if you are a genius mathematician or a genius physicist, but you must pass a certain set of requirements in other disciplines. Why is it that you will need to take a higher education degree with this qualification? Solutions on those issues that, sorry, please, are not spelled out in the dictionary or in any online encyclopedia. So you're a qualified person, a scientific scientist, and so on and so forth. Yes, you need to think, you need to take a law, you need to take, so to speak, a qualified opinion of professionals, consult and make decisions in this life is very ambiguous. Why do there exist special doctors? For example, council meetings are not so for someone. These are appropriate advice or some symposia or some round tables where certain decisions are made. Well, I want to say that international organizations, the Universal Organization of the United Nations, do this every day when people from different cultures, from different countries, of different scales, representing different scales between their state, develop approaches, having different points of view on some problems. This is life. That's what it is called. Yeah, there are monosyllabic things, and there are those that need to be thought about. And these are from this environment, from this part.
Okay, then the question to Maria Zakharova is not to a diplomat, but to Maria Zakharova as a creative unit. The poet Afti is good for the author of the text. I know relationships don't mean poems, we have texts. Here is the situation. My good friend Klim Poplavsky, the director in whom I worked for many years, he went to SFO, volunteered there, and
This is Jan Poplavsky's son.
yes, that's right. Before that, he was injured in Syria. That is, his position cannot cause anyone doubts. And suddenly it comes to him because at one time he, together with Zavorotnyuk as an actress, filmed the video. There are very good rock groups for the song. Here is the frontman, who is recognized as a foreign agent by two. And they turned to him with the demand that he abandon this clip. I would say I regret that this is what the word not sparrow means. I vomited myself. I was wrong. It seems to me that this nonsense clip was filmed when the clip itself is a work of art. The song is good, so we have to separate the creator from the product. The man who wrote the song turned out to be a bastard of scum. We are now removing it from the rotation.
This
Cut away.
It must be Kirov, and there is no ambiguity here. Now, if I may, let us move on to this whole world, which seems to me to have gone down in history and goes through the whole historical process under the heading of the genius of evil. Pushkin tried to answer this question in his work. Mozart in Saliera still, none of the recognized geniuses can give a single formulated answer to this question. Let's figure it out. There you go. You just said the name of the group and I'll give you their own example. Awesome song, My Rock and Roll. Who accompanied the vocals?
Chicherina.
With Chicherina, this is that public figure. I do not tell the singer because it is already clear. I take Shiver, that public figure who knew what was happening in Ukraine. Then, when Donbass was part of Ukraine, not from videos, not from records of social organizations, she knew herself as much as she went there and how much of her life she invested there through help, through moral support. Few people know. She doesn't do PR. She doesn't know what I know about her, but I know from the guys who told me what we're going to do with the song, what we're going to do with this fantastic song, My Rock and Roll. Yes, when I hear her phrase in this song, the ice melts, how she sings it there and how they arranged it all there and so on. For me, this is the whole world. This is space. This is my years. Then this is my knowledge of music. This is my country. This is my culture. That's what helped me believe in the future. These are the ones. Such songs carried us through painful times, rebuilding life from near ruin. With little left emotionally and financially, we persevered. And music like this renewed our sense of hope. And what are we going to do about it from here? In my opinion, the next conclusion is how long humanity will be until the very last breath. This question will be, don't create an idol for yourself. This phrase is not only about the impossibility of idolatry. This phrase is precisely about the fact that there is someone through whom it came, who created it. But there is the work itself. You can be inspired by the work. It can pull you out. Unprecedented trials when everything, and perhaps the one who created it, can be a single whole. It can be different. Do you want another example? Dostoevsky was sentenced to death, and for what? Dostoevsky was sentenced to death for essentially terrorism, for participating in anti-state extremist activities. I am not speaking in the words and expressions that were in his sentence. His physical execution was at the last second when he had already accepted it. replaced by hard labor, was performed as a ceremonial ritual. Relatively speaking, of course, there will be several years of hard labor and service and so on as a result of this. Crime has become the greatest works of our civilization, such as crimes and punishments, such as the idiot, such as the meek, and much, much more. What are we going to do about it? This is the same person who has reached the point of destroying other people in his country and his state of hatred in its very nature, which is not called the fire of appearance, and the man who wrote, in fact, fiction literature, but uplifting and absolutely close to spiritual literature. This person who was, well, I can't say invited guest, well, definitely not the expression, but who was with. He became related to his own desert, which he fed on it, and now the Optena desert becomes a place where people come, including to understand Dostoevsky. What inspires the same person? The path of awareness and repentance, and this is to the question of what will we say to those who have left? Or maybe we'll listen to them. Will they listen to themselves? Or maybe they'll tell themselves something. Maybe later, when they tell themselves something, they will tell us something and everyone something. Or maybe they will also say something that will become the most important word. Hence another story, the prodigal son. From the same book, by the way, different chapters of different parts, he had two sons. One loved him and was always with him, and two can be said differently about emotions and ideology. He left and left him. Well, I think it was not without curses addressed to my own father, so to speak, as often happens sometimes. And then he came back with repentance. And these most amazing pictures that show us all this, and he fell to his knees on, well, how is this depicted by the classics? And what happened? What is the essence of this parable? The whole point of this biblical story with the prodigal son is not even that he came and not even that he repented. And not just in his biological father accepting him, but in the complex emotions stirred by his brother, who grew up alongside their father and now resents him for reclaiming his son in an act of repentance. This is something we must not overlook. When it comes to repentance, it can manifest itself in different ways. It can be sincere and literally on a level. This is the catharsis of realizing that I have put on, and I know people like that. Or maybe still hidden, because Silto was only enough for internal remorse. But if this is repentance and the understanding that, yes, can such people be repelled, so to speak? Is it possible not to see this? Is it possible to mock him? But if it is, another thing, if it is again about returning to the same circles of not seeing suffering, not sympathizing with those who are next to you, who are essentially like Atlantis these years, on their shoulders, this situation.
So to speak, did he pull it out or withstand it? Well, then it means that you need to treat your friend, but it is also very important not to forget these things. Let's look at this story from another side, but the work of art itself and what to do with it.
Here.
This is a colossal question. This is a very interesting question. And in this case, I will not theorize, but give one example, in my opinion, which answers everything.
And in this sense, yes, I'm probably running away from my answer, but I still won't give better examples of Wagner, who.
In the second half, well, I think at the very end of the 19th century, he wrote an anti-Semitic treatise.
And Ripa is anti-Semitic.
Just
Generally such an open and...
Absolutely, this is a treatise that was devoted to the division of music according to the ethnic principle, and so on and so on. Wagner, who created works of incredible complexity. I'm not sure of their nature, how human it is, and well, you know what I'm talking about. I don't know how you can even hear that. Wagner, whose works became essentially part of the culture of the Third Reich. Well, it certainly is.
Well, Flight to Volkivia.
Wagner, whose works were put in the concentration camps under them by people, entered the cameras. Gas stoves were turned on under them over people. People were mocked under them, killed on ethnic grounds. It seems, well, such an unambiguous story that there can be no other answer, and so on and so on. In Wagner's Israel, I'm not sure that there was a law there, but not publicly. They didn't enforce it all these decades. It was first performed in Jerusalem in 2001. Performed, so to speak, of course, by a person who is a representative of Israel's culture, religion, ethnos, whatever. What an incredible triumph over the ideas of evil. To perform to the side that constitutes the people who survived this work not in ruins, but in the context of what was created in the post-war years. But there is an even more, in my opinion, strong part of this story. The end of the 40 years after the war, only 3 years passed. Leonard Bernstein is the most famous composer and conductor. He performed various works, including with the orchestra that was there. I think there were 17, slightly less than 20 people. These were people who survived the concentration camps, and they put together this kind of orchestra. It was called the Orchestra of Survivors in the camps, glorifying the people who were trying to destroy and who survived, and he performed Wagner with them. It was about 1948. What do you think of the answer? This is about the fact that music and works that some wanted to kill with their misanthropic ideas of ideology and philosophy have been revived by others. This is what you need to remember, and there will never be an unambiguous answer. It will be about thinking, it will be about history, about knowledge, about history, about the power of the human spirit, when even this is the very thing. Fallen, not just trampled in the mud, but renewed. Forgive me can be washed and given this humanity a human dimension. I'll give you another example, which I thought about a lot because I read a lot, including her works. I mean, the memoirs of Leni Riefenstahl, who was Leni Riefenstahl. She was a multifaceted person, but she was a person of the Third Reich. She was not an ideal. Bochum, but she was that person, an artist who realized himself at this time what she was doing. She was both a dancer and an actress, but her main thing, her intended role, or one might even say function, and I would venture to say her mission in this life was to direct several major documentaries about that time. Naturally, she didn't make a documentary here that denounced, she didn't make a documentary that
Exposed, she praised Nazism.
She showed through documentaries and artistic techniques that era A. Well, you can look, I won't retell all this. This was also related to the ideology of the Third Reich. It had to do with the Olympics and so on. She knew Hitler. After the war, she was subjected to everything from criminal prosecutions,
You can look at the wording of those accusations that were determined against her, of course. Not just censure, it was real. Her real, as it were, her removal from such sociocultural public life, that is, she became an outcast, and not in one country, but this was, so to speak, a large space. I want to say that I don't know how we would talk today about the Third Reich and about that monstrous phenomenon of Europe in the 1930s if there were no this footage. No one would believe us, no one would believe me if I told you that it was about hundreds of thousands of people who marched in a frenzy, throwing down their hands and so on and so on. No one would believe us. The question is, she lived an incredibly long life despite everything, and she dedicated her last years to Africa. She went to the African continent. She writes about it in her memoirs. And I think that this was also a way out, or maybe it's even written there, and I don't want to appropriate this idea about myself. Maybe she describes it that way, but there is a feeling that she did it because in those familiar countries where she spent the first part of her life, her fashion, that is, she would not be able to realize further, and she was incredibly active. She went to Africa, she made films about Africa, she took photographs, she studied Africa, and the last years of her life are hard to imagine. She painted there, usually there, like I erased the years in order to appear younger there, or produce some effect there. Someone erased the years in order to sign up for the front to cover herself. She changed the years in order to be given permission to dive to the bottom of the sea with a scuba diver, and she spent her last year studying the underwater world and filming the underwater world. I want to say this again without any hesitation. I will call it part, so to speak, of this social order and that. The social situation that we call the Third Reich, of course, not only that, it describes its meetings with Hitler, its emotions and so on. But without this now, we would not be able to prove much by analyzing how big was it and how scary was it and how much was it. I would say contagious. Here's another example. So you need to think and analyze each situation. And if a person calls for the murder of other people, if a person sponsors a misanthropic ideology in a practical, theoretical sense, there is a law for this, and it must be applied if we are talking about works that were created by a person. If in this work there is a direct appeal or a veiled appeal to something like this.
Another.
This.
My answer to your question is ambiguous. It is not one-dimensional. It needs to be thought about. And if there are calls, it must also become law if it is a work of art. You just have to treat it as a work of art, but at the same time remember the context and the history, and probably also think about the people, because it's one thing to perform Wagner when people who survived the Holocaust. We got together and gathered our strength to do this. And the second thing was to put Wagner knowing that your neighbor survived the German occupation and you just wanted to listen without thinking about the consequences, but the neighbor was Tetizina. She didn't tell, she was small, and periodically her parents asked that when they were away, she come in and check on me. Then there was such a word to check, like there, yes, I was 6 or 7 years old, she checked me. And I don't remember what the context was. Some phrase was pronounced in German. The Pope knows German. He knows many languages.
but I don't remember what the context was. I saw how Anzina was a very joyful, cheerful, such an absolutely charming, funny woman, and everything turned upside down.
Sent in German.
And then I asked her how. What happened later when I spoke, when I said something wrong, and why can't I still listen? She was in the occupation zone, she lived, I can't, she said. That's about it. About what you need to think, you need to feel, you need to be human in every sense of the word. But I recently watched an interview with Gurchenko. I watched them periodically. Yeah, she told me how she was in Kharkov. They performed, sang, danced, desperately seeking sustenance while avoiding death. In cinemas under occupation, films of the 1930s showcased German culture, highlighting monumental cinematic advancements during that era. They were ready to sing, dance, do anything just to get at least some food as long as they didn't get killed. And as she said, how were the occupations watched in cinemas? Naturally, the Germans were shown films from the 1930s and, by the way, the 20s, 30s. This was an incredible rise of cinema in Western Europe and precisely in Germany, by the way, the same Riefenstahl line. Going to the cinema, somewhere there, she heard these songs and so on, what she remembers with horror and shuddering these years, and they passed through her entire life, occupation, Nazism, fascism, Germans, and so on. Well, there are doubts here, I think no one has. But at the same time, she also heard and saw a piece of that culture, those songs, that singing, and even saw it as a child. This little fragment of something that wasn't as monstrous as everything else. This is also a fact. And then she became one. And someone can say when she was little, the Germans were there, which means they were sitting, playing a movie, and she overheard, listened, and so on. And I will say that it was Gurchenko who became that one, who brought the theme of victory songs back to our television screens in a special format. Not just for the holidays, not just through pop, but through artistic embodiment. She was one with these same songs of the war years of how she performed them. You have to watch it. Thank God, everything is there. That's why you need to think, you need to feel, you need to know history, you need to know the context and not do this. Monosyllable, monosyllable. You don't want to answer questions? What about seeing the whole history of mankind and remaining human?
Our program is called The Word is Not a Sparrow. It is understandable. And the saying I would like to understand, we can include the collaboration of the author of texts by Maria Zakharova and the singer Nargiz in this category.
No, well, a sequel to the same, by the way.
Which entry is prohibited. As far as I understand, this is not your department for 50 years in Russia.
Duty.
It doesn't matter.
Yes, she has her own story related to something. I'm with her in that sense. Well, really, honestly, it didn't cross in any way. She was the person who sang the song, Bring Back Your Memory.
Yes.
Yeah. At the Moscow Film Festival.
Maxim Page wrote it.
Well, this is the same case. I don't know, the only one. I think the only time in her life when she actually experienced catharsis from, well, because what she was describing then when I came to her dressing room, it was catharsis. That is, she said that she didn't understand where. She didn't understand directly. I mean, that she was so emotional. Amazed by the audience's reaction, the audience began to stand up. This is one time. She'd seen the hall grow. In general, the woman once saw him perform the song. The audience starts to stand up. People are crying, It struck her, and she experienced something she couldn't even describe, but it was essentially cathartic.
Yes, yeah, that is the highest note in the performance of some work of a role and so on.
And she sang it until she started this very part of her life that I think is absolutely self-destructive for her.
Then there were a whole series of interviews with her where she said some kind of impossible nonsense. I just can't understand whether she really thinks that is, she believes it, or she understood that she was telling a lie, but she said it anyway. I just don't know. Well, that's a monstrous lie.
That she supposedly didn't know what the song was about and so on. We discussed it with her for a couple of hours.
Or on the phone?
And we discussed on the phone, and then in correspondence, I have part of the correspondence.
Uh-huh.
And she was very grateful for the song, and she began to say that she didn't know that the song about Donbas was a song about Syria, in fact, about our pilot Peshkov, yeah.
That?
Everything is mixed up for him. I say again, no, I don't even want to wonder what's wrong with her. Why did she do it? I don't want to. Well, I can say for sure that all of her are these few interviews that she gave.
They were, of course, an absolute lie in this context. She knew the song. She and I had talked about an hour and a half on the phone once before she even started recording. Then during recording, during after recording, then before a concert performance
in, so to speak, as part of the film festival. And once we met in person in the dressing room after she performed it, everything was shaking. Then when she broke up creative there, so to speak, a contract with Max Fadeev, she called me and asked permission to perform this song, further this one.
Song.
Yes, this is this part. I have correspondence with it. Does she understand correctly what she is? Maybe she can perform it for her. It's so important and so on. I say, of course, all the songs in which I take part, I mean, as the author of the text, can be performed for everyone's health.
I don't know what's wrong with the person and don't even want to think about it, but I have my inner answer.
But you can definitely hear him.
Yes, I wasn't unsure. Isn't there a phrase like that in Russian?
Yes.
Here he's spinning and spinning, and so a person gets confused. Yeah, someone comes out of this funnel further, yeah, so to speak.
Grinding, huh?
You truly are remarkable.
This is a story about the fact that you sit and listen to these interviews and you can't help but listen to them because they start sending you links too. Well, this lie was pure water.
I talked to several interviewers, then they called me, or I called them in different ways and said, you just keep in mind, you will still be interviewing again, or you may have some kind of note associated here is simply not true, and presented them with relevant evidence.
Here is Marina Leskoy from such a media ideologist. She says that talent does not ennoble its bearer, that a person can be, that since it all comes from there, it can affect the individual differently, so to speak. And a person can be compatible or yes to the question of that genius of evil deeds, answers Marina Lesko. And I agree with her, let's admit it to me as a person of the older generation who grew up in parts on Soviet rock. Some of the people who were in my notebook, they are banned. I am banned from them. We don't have a relationship and I can't understand what drives them. Well, why should I relinquish what is rightfully mine from the songs written in the 70s and 80s? These works are shared heritage, not exclusive to any individual or group. They were intended for everyone, not documented as proprietary to one entity. I aim to understand, this is Maria Vladimirovna Zakharova's stance, how we can delineate the product clearly from the creator.
So I merely expressed that point.
I'm looking for yes, but I want it to sound straight. That's right.
I would like to state my apologies explicitly. I'm uncertain about the origin of the Marina quote you referenced.
Lesko.
Lesko, if you could kindly provide me a reference or some form of context, that would be greatly appreciated.
I miss.
I read it with great curiosity, as I find it intriguing. However, I must admit that the sentiment expressed in the phrase doesn't resonate deeply with me. Allow me to convey my view. I once shared this with a friend, that having talent or genius does not inherently elevate the moral character of the one who possesses it.
Well, creative.
Or maybe it's the other way around, or maybe it's different and this and that. That is, can't it be said that any genius is not ennobled by his genius? No, of course it happens. People I don't know are Ekaterina Maximova, I wasn't lucky enough to come into contact with. Cross, I can't cross, it's impossible to cross this some kind of symbolic equality here. And I would say to touch her, to see her up close, it's not incredible, it's incredible. This is the same one. Varying tenderness on stage and some incredible lightness in everything and equally genuine. True charm, but probably not the right word. Some kind of absolute spirituality, embodied spirituality can be, that's what it is in life. This is not about modesty. I mean, such categories, they know that to me too. This is not such a modest little man, but no, this is the spirit of incarnation. What we're discussing, her talent, genius, nobility, and phenomenal uniqueness, few can match. She stands as a singular figure of achievement and dedication. There were other examples I don't want to talk about. Well, one way or another, since childhood, I had, so to speak, the pleasure of coming into contact with the creative environment, sometimes not the pleasure. Sometimes there was even a shock, and sometimes he doesn't flutter, or he means he gives out some kind of roles. But in life, you need it, my God. For God's sake, and therefore it is very important to remember, don't create an idol for yourself. And at the same time, it is generally better, as it were, it is very difficult, you know? It is very difficult to separate the role from the person. Sometimes there will be such skill that you are straight. You get used to this image created by man and expect the same from him. Well, now it seems that everyone has this. We have already understood everything. We have already read it. We have already gotten used to it. That one thing, role 2 is image. Moreover, a huge number of actors give interviews there. They reveal in different ways. They open up. So such deception is no longer there, but it used to be. But at the same time, you need to also be vigilant. So, of course, a person who is the bearer of talent, of genius, or he's just a conductor and such, maybe a person may not even understand what is happening. This is Gurchenko. She was asked, what movies do you like to watch? She says, I don't like to review any. I revise, she says. Only those fragments when I don't understand how I did it. That is, even she spoke about the fact that there are moments that are not subordinate to her, where she is not her. And she explained them in such a way that either the cameraman saw it that way and the director did it that way, and maybe the editor, lighting guy, and so on, or it's something that doesn't lend itself to any explanation at all. Well, how can we not hear them themselves when they speak? And I don't know how it came. It came. Reading Vysotsky, Pushkin, Lermontov, or Akhmatova immerses you in another era. It makes you reflect. What was the essence of that time? And when we read Vysotsky, we question the very context of the present. And you listen and read. I believe these are different degrees of perception, including 100%. Vysotsky's brilliance feels both modern and timeless, creating an enduring connection that's impossible to fully grasp. And this person, this and this, those people who stood in line, those people who changed their apartments by many people who sincerely believed in ideology there, he's their contemporary. How did he do it? So he combined these words as he wrote about the Great Patriotic War, so there is not a single frontal word. Well, there's such an emotion that it's incredible. How can you ask him? But us, though it's no longer possible, I feel he might not have responded.
I don't think I answered.
And at the same time, Pushkin said, inspiration is not for sale, but there may be a lot of manuscripts to sell, and he might have explained, or maybe not. And they explained to us that it was a large library, combination of languages, Nanierina Rodionovna.
Everything from there.
Some say because his ancestor was Hannibal and he was of Ethiopian descent. Some try to explain what, but some say there is no need. You still won't explain, and in this sense I agree. And I want to say that I would like to be here. To draw a line at this point is not to say everything. We are allowed to understand not everything is open to us. And on the one hand, you need to think, reflect on this with the brains given to us. We are given opportunities for this, but at the same time, we must always remember that. We cannot understand everything, and not everything is given to us to understand. And maybe precisely in the process of understanding, in the process, including humility during this thinking, someone can open up, as Akhmatova said, if you knew from which one. Soon, Sora, poems will grow without knowing shame. Isn't this the answer to the question, where is the work? Where is the author? Well, let's say that Akhmatova's talented Tirog is brilliant. You can take it away, of course. Like Akhmatova, different Akhmatova, this period of the divination of Akhmism, I put on a black skirt to seem even slimmer and keep me the wind and so on, and Akhmatova Rakvil. And Akhmatov's era of evacuation and poems about the Russian language are different people. These are different destinies in one person. When you knew from what quarrel the poems of shame grow, not wisdom, here is the key. I don't want to start this topic, but it's just a small quest for everyone, as they say now. But we don't know people. Yes, under what circumstances and how? We come into this world and they are so amazing and usually stay behind 7 seals. Well, of course, something is written in metrics, testimonies, of course, some photographs are shown there and they tell us something as a rule. Well, mythologized, legendary, sometimes coinciding and sometimes flavoring. Wounds. But in reality, it happens so differently and such different people happen. And it happens that it seems that nothing suggests that this person will later save the world, for example, or someone will discover the law. Yes, universal gravity or something else, or will write some work that will be uplifting and saving for a huge number of people. There are some things that remain a secret, and let's still remember that we are not the Messiah. As always, I'm no magician, but a willing learner navigating life's endless lessons.
Well, yes.
Let's give it a little. I also remember that not everything is given to us. This is how to take it and reveal it. You need to think, you need to feel, you need to know history, you need to be principled. But at the same time, always remember that we don't know everything.
How relatives comment on the creator is not work with work is more or less clear. Zakharova is the eye and face of the country. This is clear. This is how parents treat creativity. I can understand how dad and mom listen to music in Russian.
Malus, and it's like Sahaya. But it all began, as I correctly said, at the beginning, from the very beginning. And from the very beginning, it was when Dad checked my essays. Now the educational process is happening somewhat differently. Yeah, now all sorts of tests are now so-called probes at school and so on. And before they gave you an essay, but it was a terrible pain for me to write. In essay class, I couldn't understand. I can write something worthwhile in 45 minutes when there's a whole world. Here are the sources for you. Here is a quote for you and so on. But there were many essays that were asked at home and checked the essays. Dad, And that was well, apart from Rubilov's words, with all the richness of the Russian language, I won't find anything else. It was Rubilova, it was cries of tears. That I don't know. Now probably psychologists said that it was. And stalking with gaslighting was not removable when he says you can't write like that. I'm not saying it's not that you're wrong, Dad, you don't understand anything, and we argued, we discussed, and he laughed at me, I defended it, then I laughed at him about it. He went into some kind of semi-mad state of his own, it's just a homework check on literature. Yeah, it was something incredible, that is, everyone didn't think anything was necessary. Smooth out any corners, show no delicacy, and nothing, it was absolutely. Here Rubilova, yeah, every time, and it was often, and I was preparing for this too. That is, all these debates, so to speak, during the talk show is a school. What are you talking about? What kind of live broadcast on the BBC was live there? So, of course, it was a school of logic, a school of reinforced concrete arguments, which it was necessary to either block something or it was necessary to agree. Therefore, this is how they treated creativity. It was a living fabric, it was a living discussion, it was a living controversy, it never happened. Oh, girl, my condition stool will now come to a guest, will tie a bank for you, now you'll read. It was criticism, it was praise, it was a delight. Well, it was a pity that it didn't work out honestly. Yeah, that's why actually it's a different matter that they always encouraged creativity. That is, they didn't encourage the demonstration of this creativity. It was just somewhere on the verge of taboo, that is none. So in the presence of guests, let's perform something or look at ours, which one is not. It was a bad tone and it remains that way. But to creativity as a way of life first and foremost. Life is creation, life is creation. It is not self-destruction or the destruction of others. It is creation and creation. Man is a creator, creativity as a way to overcome all passion. By the way, challenges. And as a way to get rid of all kinds of discouragement, as they say there now, depression of everything. That is, creativity was literally in first place. Again, not from the category of verse composition or calmness or any other drawing there, but as a way of thinking. How do you create a lifestyle? You have the opportunity, show yourself sad, please. What are you good at there? Write, compose, sing, dance, something fun for you. Don't you find the same? The way out of the situation is write, create, write it down. You'll return it. You'll think about this and so on. And in this sense, I'm grateful to them. It was absolutely brilliant.
And let's say my mother-in-law is my mother-in-law.
I never knew my mother-in-law. She passed away while my husband was still studying.
No information smells everything.
Yes, so in this way, we unfortunately didn't have the chance to share things like that.
Okay, husband, daughter.
We're not arguing here. They were not interested in everything, and it was interesting, but my husband is generally from a different field. He's an engineer. He has more of this attitude.
He's figured something out.
He is interested. That is, with us, he sees it as something amazing. Well, this is how I am, for example, once. I look at people who know the laws of physics there before understanding how everything works. I passed physics, yeah, but I don't feel it that way. And of course, for me, a person like I look at people who can sing, oh, is this for me, of course, something incredible, or to make music? Yes, it's Euro 200 without notes. Well, I saw it for an hour and a half without notes. Or for example, when, by the way, here we are, Guinness Rights, I saw it, I think it lasted 4.5 Euro 5 on track without a break. Marinka Gergiev, new scene, Wagner. Well, sorry, it's a miracle. I don't understand how he does it. That's about the same way. I mean, of course, not to the level of skill. I mean, it seems to me that my husband is also looking at something that is, or something that is unknown to him, and he knows sometimes how it turns out when I speak now. Just don't touch it now, now I need to write something down.
And I remember in one of the interviews a story about a poem.
Yes, but I don't know about it, about whether it was it. I don't know the very first that one.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the first one with which I think huaqiao was at least something to do with third grade Moscow school. Previously, there were announcements coming, and here are the pioneer leaders, or
Zucchi made announcements. So they came and said that there would be a competition. I don't remember literature. You worked on poetry. Can you submit your work there until such and such a time? The contest was a city contest. Not in my opinion. That is, of course, he was from Moscow, the district, or in my opinion, he was still from the city. Yeah, I took part in it and I wrote a poem. Did I finish something that was there somewhere on purpose or brought something that I had in advance? I don't remember, but I participated. These poems are about peace. Peace is the main thing, as if
It became apparent what Masha would be.
she knew how I was a member of the Politburo. I understood where the Gaza Strip was, followed me very closely, and was worried about the situation in.
Of course, with Nelson Mandela and in South Africa, I sincerely experienced all international processes, yes, 10.
Here's everything, yes.
Why earlier? Well, this was also before. I can't say anything, I'm sinful, and of course I was also very interested in everything related to television. Programs are different programs then, however, it was not all that developed, but it was really something that interested me. Yes, and peace is the main word in the world. All adult children want measures.
The question about the art of leaving is this question, I remember. The question was asked, huh?
The art of leaving.
The answers are probably the art of getting away from.
To what question? I didn't answer.
About the first love, there was a story about the Kama bicycle. That is, the temple is very neatly built. Program.
Not true. There was another story. We flew somewhere or from somewhere, well, somewhere in the area of Mozambique. We flew over, and I also assume that they will ask me about this now. I can tell you everything.
Ready for long?
Latitude and longitude means no, I'm sorry. Yes, we were flying from Mauritania to Sudan and I was reading some summaries of digests and suddenly I saw news about the fact that the bicycle revives that same kama, that same bicycle that was a bicycle of the 80s. And I literally, well, I couldn't do anything. I just took it and wrote a post. I collected this post. On one site alone, more than 1 million, as far as I remember, views this post was about the Kama bicycle. And after I published it, so many people wrote to me in the comments and friends called the self-service. I received another letter. The bicycle school is not supposed to come from the factory. Now Kama is new, updated. I can't get back to myself. And there was a note at the end. What?
Maybe.
That's me too.
Pass.
I don't recall my first love as clearly as I remember that green Kama bicycle. Or maybe it was synonymous.
To begin with.
It wasn't evasion, it was nostalgia. Those memories of that bike were so vivid, I dared to compare it to something equally cherished.
Feeling and poems emerged during my childhood. Those who liked the lyrics were not just about the world.
Wait, was it a fleeting moment as a child?
As a child.
Of course, there were some such things. These are social and social topics. Then came some kind of intimate lyrics, I would say. The moment of knowledge of literature through literature, that is, I had a very powerful response to reading poetry. That is, I will read poetry and I just need some specific feedback to sit down and write. I wanted not to think about it, but here I am. The story was already going on. Well, for example, I listened to how this music could be. The orchestra was symphonic classical music. I opened my notebooks. I couldn't stop there. And it could be more than that. We could not only be in a poem, it could be poems and some kind of sketches that is some kind of figurative.
That was my mindset, which I recorded faithfully. Of course, life's pauses came. At the Institute, philosophy led me on a long hiatus, delving into strange cosmic thoughts, as I call them, a phase of peculiar ideas. The feeling of the worlds of universes. And then I realized that I don't need something similar yet. This is where my mother said, "You are wrong. We need to continue." I say, "Mom, a little I feel."
What I don't really understand is what I'm writing about. There is a moment that is not poetry and not just rhyming, but the images that arise begin to scare me little by little. Of course, it wasn't there in the black house. Well, what kind of worlds are that is?
I also wrote my graduation essay in poetry. And as I realized that these images are not only somewhat premature, they scare me somewhat. That is, here I come to the question again regarding the author of Yu-Gi-Oh! And the work. That is, as an author,
I began to be a little scared of what turns out later, many years talking with various authors, directors, screenwriters, writers, poets. I came across this very phrase, but don't go there.
Yeah, but don't develop this. But many explained it in such a way that the created work, given that it may be co-authored by the author and those, I don't know, the inspirations or anything there, drink or I don't know, something that comes, it can start the author, start managing the author. Yeah, it is not the author who controls the work, but the work controls the author. And by the way, there are quite a few examples when authors became harbingers of their fate
and they wrote a script for some tragic events. And this is not even about futurology. This is not about eternal bread, Belyaev. This is not about the hyperboloid engineer Garin. Here are such things as if fishing rods were thrown into the future, namely about the fact that the authors began to create something real, which then turned into a real reality. And I heard this from several people who said you tell some kind of storyline and you say how interesting, and yes, and then you say, but you don't need it yet. I say, why is it so different from a fluctuation? But from the word quicksand, that is, the fluctuation is not shaky from the point of view of the topic scenario, but it is dangerous. So that there is no need. And when I was a student, I realized that something was happening, that I stopped controlling and that it began to kind of control. Maybe you know me, but you can't look into the abyss because otherwise the abyss can look in
himself.
Did I leave it? For a long time, that is, I could, as it were, write something there on occasion or there conditionally in the walls a newspaper. Yes, but in the form of my worldview, I left it many years later. When it has already been read, when a certain idea has already been formed, when you already understood the price and value of words, when you understood that thought is material, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was wretched, and the Word was God and design. He then incarnates. That's when this dam was simply washed away, destroyed, and it began. And in this sense, I felt not that I was not confident. I felt some kind of real, pure freedom in a good sense.
Yes, Despite everything, there was still one true love, regardless of whether there are memories to hold on to or not. Not at all.
The rest, I remember that it was like this in kindergarten, but I won't be able to tell me anything about it now because I'm leaving the responsible question. I just don't remember.
Uh-huh.
There were some dramatic moments there, but I won't say anything now because it seems to me that there were a lot of bright events. Moving with parents, business trips, embassy life was constantly changing. There were a lot of all sorts of events.
You are our extraordinary women of remarkable strength. Manage.
I'm still contemplating the deep cultural descriptions laid out in society's norms. Christian Orthodox, and at the same time I do not see contradictions against the culture, prototypes of the same Jewish culture, and at the same time Eastern culture, that after all we are talking about a certain unity and complementarity and mutual.
Yes?
Through entirely diverse methods, there's a balance of trimming and control.
However, we are all inherently different beings.
Naturally, I can't discern who you are as a person. That said, it's ultimately up to each individual to define their identity.
Uh-huh.
I grew up, so yes, you're human, that's understood.
Uh-huh.
You're evidently a woman just as I am, a human woman.
Yes, I remember my conversation with Vladimir Wolfovich, yes, Zhirinovsky, and at the time an election race was ongoing with Hillary Clinton, and I posed a question to him about a similar prospect in Russia. Women participate in the presidential race and win, and he said that this is impossible because we are a warring country, we are at war all the time. So a little bit about narratives, as you can comment.
10th century AD, Princess Olga. How did she fight the Drevlians? Oh God, remember they killed her husband Igor, so to speak, and how cleverly and strategically she avenged them for this.
Not only that, you can see and read what she made of the ambassadors, how she made them there and alive. There she buried and opened all sorts of things, and how she watered the cities was also clever. Yeah, you know, the same strategy that might be taught in military academies if they were then.
What else do we have from history? For example, Elizabeth Petrovna, yes, the 7 Years' War. Where did this 7 Years' War lead Elizabeth Petrovna? Or where did Elizabeth Petrovna lead everyone? Let me remind you, before Berlin, that then, so to speak, the opposite hostile side said that if it had not died, then Europe would not have existed, and it had not stopped in Berlin either. More historical examples, which means two, by the way.
Vedis.
Russian, Turkish, his war covers.
No, well, she actually built it.
Yes, this is, by the way, how many cities were laid by it, so to speak. And these are not just cities. This is not just a shopping center. This is not just, so to speak, points that are important from the point of view of Khabarov logistics.
Yes.
This?
Acceptance.
Odessa is Nikolaev. And read much more about the story of Catherine too. These are cities that were outposts. These are cities that were important precisely from a military strategic point of view. Therefore, you think Vladimir Wolf and Chuzinovsky that the facts were also well known to me. I don't want to theorize on this. On this topic, I sincerely believe that women only have these gifts by nature. To realize herself that, of course, it would not be in military affairs for a woman to manifest herself. But World War II showed that our women, they are. ready and able to go and perform such incredible feats, and feats are just different on the battlefield than female pilots. Although it is customary to say female pilots, there used to be female pilots and female snipers. The women, the nurses who carried it all, and the women who nursed, and the women who waited. This was the factor of the victory, and the women who in the rear. My grandmother worked alone at the A2 military plant. She doesn't earn part-time jobs. She also went to the military plant after studying. I made these same shells during the night shifts.
Its influence, Grandma.
Here is Grandma Fu, who was studying. She was evacuated in Perm.
And at the military factory after studying, they just worked in their mother's line, Tatiana Georgievna, yes, and grandmother, who worked at the military factory. This is just the junction of Moscow and the Moscow region. Helicopter factory. In general, she went to work for a furniture factory. There was a furniture factory, but when the war began, the factory was immediately reformatted to meet the needs of the front. They made parts for airplanes, so-called propeller parts. I'm not strong in this one.
Terminology, and she has worked there all her life. One, Anna Nikanorovna, here she worked at a military factory. Why should we tell women that no, this is not for you, or you will never do it, or is it so scary for us? Why is he only a great man? I don't know if it was Queen or was it
Party. I don't know who at some point said that, but let's make a manned flight of a woman into space. This is the greatest achievement. This is the greatest step. This is such a soul of denseness. What am I now? I just don't hear about the Soviet Union and they say such nasty things. My God, yes, that alone is the Soviet Union. At a time when women faced widespread inequality elsewhere, racial discrimination, restrictions in professions, the Soviet Union empowered women, even sending them into space. Or they divided women into colored people, or as they said, they're white people, and so on, when women were not given the opportunity to realize themselves in a huge number of professions. And not even that they were not hired, but even if they were hired, they paid pennies, much less than men. And against this background, the Soviet Union, says the woman, this power given in space can and will remain a woman. This ideology is not this pettiness, oh, this is it. But this act is the act of a man. Can you imagine? And we go back to what I was talking about, the union of harmony, coexistence with influence and mutual influence. It's a man's act. In the name of woman, in order to exalt woman, thereby exalting truly self-power. You know, great power. And so, by the way, I understand that we will now go in the other direction a little. So I hear so often about Christianity that they say it's some kind of thing, it's all supposedly there. Well, this one likes to swear there or whatever.
to speak with such contempt? They say, some medieval ideologies. Why medieval truth? So 2,000 years for a second. Well, that's all you don't hear is something that enslaves a woman somewhere. I apologize, this is the same philosophical concept. It is my view. I am absolutely in this sense. I sincerely want to say, in my opinion, this is not philosophy, this is knowledge. That's how I feel about Christianity. This is the knowledge that generally said and made it the basis of its, so to speak, the concept of the doctrine that the woman gave birth.
Buga, a person that is not just a person, a man once began to possess the qualities of a deity. It could be like this. Of course, everything strengthens God, but a woman. She became the mother of God. well, you know, introduced me to more progressive concepts. I would like to read Why Do They Forget About This? Therefore, you know this petty unambiguity. Again, here we are, also Zhirinovsky. Yes, remember, this is his favorite, definitely. It's not close to me. I'm talking about the past. I'm talking about history. I'm talking about relying on facts and quotes. I'm talking about the fact that a person develops, that a person walks in his own way. Life has so many opportunities after falling to be reborn, realizing to reach a completely different level. That's what I'm talking about.
By simple association, of course, when God the Mother was mentioned, I decided to ask Mary in whose honor they were named.
Maria.
Where did you come from in the Mother of God, of course?
Well,
1 year?
true, there were many different factors, but one of them I can confirm factually, my great-grandmother Maria.
And?
She clearly did.
Unfortunately, she left very early.
Uh-huh.
My grandmother, just Tatiana Georgievna, at the age of 11, she remained a round orphan and always with a huge, well, I can't say this with sadness or longing, but I'm hardly suitable for pain either, but so I always remembered my parents with a special feeling. She, despite the fact that the last time she saw her dad at 10 years old and her mother at 11, was remembered for life. And they managed to build some incredible basis of real humanity.
The intelligentsia of the people's intelligentsia and what's called the culture in her, although she was a little girl, and of course that was also, I think, part of the decision-making, Although I'm going to tell you honestly, we were waiting for Misha.
Then there were no means of determination, but somehow everyone prepared, and in general Misha became Masha. I would ask that in this case, without any asterisks, we do not violate any laws.
What would you think of that? By the way, Maria Zakharova's popularity is largely postulated by the fact that Maria Zakharova's future diplomat, Ambassador Brangi, can easily say, sit under the bench and don't bark what? Sometimes people use very undiplomatic vocabulary about this, and I'm not even talking about the fact that the main meme of the current foreign ministry is idiots in execution.
I prefer others' words remain correctly attributed.
No, I say that the minister,
Is this another's glory?
I pretend yes, but in that it has changed a lot. It seems to me, diplomacy, that there is a need right now to call things by their proper names. Or I'm mistaken.
But you have a few questions here. This is my job. Ask me, I do the voice acting.
Official position and explanation of all the different many aspects related to foreign policy activities and the work of our department. Hence, respectively, and from the sphere of activity, what you call recognition and popularity arises. That is, this is direct, in my opinion.
These are different things.
Reliability, popularity, so to speak, stylistics, you know, us. We live in an era when the traditional media is not enough to make your position heard. I am not talking about my position or the astonishment of the State Department, society, and so on. I had to go online Wednesday and one website too. It's not enough anymore. There is such a phenomenon as social networks, messengers, and so on and so on. All this required a language. You can stick as many press releases, messages, background materials to the screen as you want and demand that people read it. You could find a form that would not just be attractive, but that would be meaningful and at the same time accessible to every audience. We have our own information product. It needs to be brief, please. Whoever needs it is convenient, please. Who needs it deployed, please. Form, interview, article, press conference, please, in languages. Please, live broadcast, please, whatever you want. You want high style, you want traditionalism, you want hours of, so to speak, reasoning on every aspect. Every expert in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is available in a letter. Orally, you can ask a question, you can attend a live communication during a lecture, and so on any topic you want quickly and concisely. Well, you can say, in the spirit of modern mass communication, and this is it. That's it.
Going back to China, when I was a child, there was no meme, but meme was the last word. Chinese warning.
What year is this approximately?
This is likely the early 60s.
Well, this is exactly the time when what you call a meme was already maturing, because it is a very big mistake to believe that the word meme appeared. Well, literally 10 or 15 years ago, this was just right.
Around 70 years plus or minus, this aligns with Western European influences. Generally, philosophers and conceptualists explore the media environment. They have specific names who introduced this very terminology. Yeah, the most amazing thing, a colossal mistake that many people make, especially students, believe that mom is something funny, that mom is this, some element of humor, fun, and so on. Nothing like that, ma'am. It's basically from the unit of measurement. Well, not exactly dimensions, it's the concentrated form in which it's encoded. Visual context, meaning an element of this perception. That is, these are units of information transmission. That's what I would say, although I say it again, our audience can.
If interests arise, you can read it, and I advise you to do so. So you're just talking about the times when this was formulated. Well, plus or minus 50 years there.
Well, the last Chinese warning is kind of like that. It didn't arise out of nowhere.
Yes, we were, and before simply the word terminology itself appeared quite a long time ago. Well, excuse me, what is lubok? What's a lubok? Lubok picture. What is lubok is a wooden board that was cut quite simply, well, naturally in today's times. When any manual work is already a phenomenon in itself, it is not simple, but then it was a low art. Such craftsmanship is needed on a board. An ornament was carved, a drawing, sometimes some text, and then all this was rolled out with paint and printed on the page and appeared. Such sometimes one color, sometimes two colors, sometimes multicolor drawings. They were in our country and in Western Europe. And by the way, in Asia, in China, there were also lubul paintings, different techniques. But the meaning is the same. It was just about condensed meanings, then it was called, and then it grew.
In cartoons, for example, mango is not a fruit, it is Japanese anime mango. Then it turned into what is known in America as a comic, which stood up its subculture, but the meaning is the same picture, either emotional transfer of meaning or with additional words or with kakimito elements of words and so on and so on. Thematic genre, different. That is, this phenomenon in itself is not new. But what are the same sayings there without visuals? There is only a semantic transmission and some wisdom that found the right form. What are ditties? Well, basically.
Rap caps, the city speaks to me. That were rap chiefs?
Well, in general, plus or minus, but it seems to me that this is more just for the so-called memotics. It must be that the capacious emotional conveying meaning is a coded meaning. It can be multifaceted. It can consist of different aspects. Therefore, in China, it is an even more interesting story because their hieroglyphs were in Egypt. In China, these are completely different hieroglyphs. But the essence is the same through the graphics, the implied meaning hieroglyphs consist of.
Not just beautiful lines, every hieroglyph, well, as a rule, every hieroglyph. The vast majority of hieroglyphs consist of different keys, which also have a semantic load. And together they give out some certain meaning, sometimes one word, sometimes one hieroglyphs. This whole concept happens differently there, therefore. This culture is not a millennium old. It manifested itself differently in different eras and was called differently, but there is no need to think what it is. It's just the last couple of decades that humanity has found something like this.
And in general, a lot of what we use in the media environment is so incomprehensible to people, especially young specialists, in fact, that they learn about it after some time. They are shocked by this first thought. Well, for example, few people now know about a newspaper. We have to tell all this too. What is a newspaper? Everyone says, well, how is it? Here is the newspaper from the Italian word of the same name, which denoted a small coin. A newspaper is not paper, but a newspaper is a coin that was paid for a piece of paper or several pieces of paper with some kind of information soap opera. Yes, now the series is different. What's a soap operation, huh?
Advertising that was supposed to attract an audience. And under this advertisement, under the advertisement of soap or some kind of soapy foam detergents, they came up with different stories. And then they connected meaningfully from here, strictly speaking, a soap opera, and not because it's slimy and because there are housewives sitting and crying. And there are a huge number of such stories. Here, by the way, one of my favorite elephants was driven through the streets, as you can see.
Well, a well-known poem about what kind of elephant was and why our Russians were driven through the streets. An elephant was used as a billboard, only attracting much more attention than simply,
so to speak, some kind of frontal way of displaying advertising. That is, they brought an elephant to an elephant and hung it with advertisements. There used to be some kind of tea advertisement, and in the children's street department, people were delighted because, of course, where else could they see it? And at the same time, they were enlightened by this very advertisement. But here, for example, another story too, but this is a fantasy, how interesting our media world is. Now there is a lot left in Moscow, and thank God, and a low bow to the city for the fact that it pays such attention to the preservation of historical and cultural heritage in the form of buildings and is not restored. It is mounted, and look at those buildings that do not go butt to butt, but which, for example, the side part, well, the pre-revolutionary buildings of the 19th and early 20th centuries go through the buildings. One of the parts, for example, the side part, it's not adjacent and somehow it's not just flat, but there's some kind of bas relief or some kind of molding, and something like that. Many people think it's just an ornament. The void framed by the ornament is the Mauer brand. This is exactly the place that was originally laid by the architect for advertising.
I didn't know that, by the way.
Brenda Mauer, please read. Look how many you can even type into the search engine and brand Mauer Moscow building. You will find many amazing places. And the most interesting thing is that after the revolution, despite the demolition of the ideology of ideas and the concept of life in general, many of them retained their true purpose up to the present day and were used for advertising on the already Soviet one.
So, regarding the latest Chinese warning, a threat that no one takes seriously, unfortunately, during recent years, our enemies and opponents alike Often our country, and in particular your department, are accused of hearing these very latest Chinese warnings that something is being voiced, but they do not believe or fear and ignore it. What can be done about it? And should we do something about it?
Well, do you seem to know what a special military operation is going on?
Yes.
Sorry, but we waited a long time. Warnings and calls for action were issued repeatedly for years. And they called not in theory in order to divert views from our preparations, but in reality they called for joint work on, in particular, the reassembly of Ukraine on those international legal grounds that would give it the opportunity to exist within the borders. Well, I mean, of course, without taking Crimea into account at that time, but at the same time to reintegrate and live peacefully and calmly, overcoming the historical challenges that were there, of course. And these appeals were not empty lust or what they were. Real painstaking work, which was really denounced by the format of international law, since it became part of the Security Council resolution, it must be implemented when. This deception became obvious from the side when everything that was revealed, when the number of blows inflicted by the Kiev regime, so to speak, began to go off the scale, then others were adopted.
Other decisions and moved on to other actions, which came to be called a special military operation. What other warnings are you talking about?
I remember how
I hear the calls. I am the president of much addressed. I understood ours there.
I got it.
We are genuinely hard at work, my brothers.
Let me add, the sisters contribute equally too.
The French diplomat Jules Bessner was so loving, as it seems to me, and understood Russia. I was once asked a question by a rock musician, Graham of Omonov, who asked if it is true that in the West we are Russians. Although we look, in general, it seems that they consider, as it were, well, blacks. This is literally a quote. What is this for from afar? When Merkel, the head of the largest European country, openly admits that they deceived us with the Minsk agreements. She doesn't hide it, it hasn't been revealed. It means this is normal for them. It's like valor. I can't even imagine a politician of ours who would brag about what he did and cheated. I am interested in my opponent and enemy, how the Chinese are arranged in this sense. Here the Chinese make this kind of statement, they would be delighted that this time they deceived, or they in this sense.
You articulated it well. Let's revisit the start of this matter. Your statement, which in my opinion ought to echo throughout our dialogue, highlights that their sense of normalcy differs greatly. To declare that someone has been deceived or treated differently from us, do I think we are people of some kind? This concept has been repeatedly theirs. Politics and state structure, you understand that this is not just a single psycho who in 30 years completely by accident on the wave of some cataclysm fell into the orbit of power and there, quickly pressing all the buttons, means he went to war against the Soviet Union. The Children's Union is a well thought out strategy, ideology, philosophy which had depth. I don't know how many light years it is. The scope of influence spans resources from Britain, the US, and the surrounding local businesses that persist amid those dynamics and realities.
And not only that, but also a conceptual, philosophical understanding of the fact that there are people who, as Zelensky now echoes, why is he called a neo-Nazi? Supposedly not people, but they were, as Zelensky said, individuals. That is, at that time they were called people, not, so to speak, developed to the corresponding races of the first class. And they, so to speak, should either be placed in the service of the true, as they call themselves, Aryans in the higher races, according to them, or if they would have coped poorly with this work or would not have coped from their point of view in general, then destroyed. What are these plans? The concept, you understand, you ask, how are the Chinese doing with the Chinese? For example, in the 21st century, despite what they have done, well, indeed, a technological miracle, an economic miracle is China. It's completely digitized. They already live somewhere, you know, in some kind of community in which no one has lived yet. That is, these are not just external surveillance cameras, and this is the integration of a person without a factory under the skin of a chip, but the integration of a person with his life in the life of society through a digital yes. Here they, being already in this part of their development, say that their philosophical vision of the future is formulated as humanity of a single destiny, that they consider the world not as a fragmentation of different people. According to the degree of development and the degree, what do you say about genetic superiority, but how about unity?
Not just interconnection, but an inseparable link between parts. Development demands a holistic approach. Selective isolation is ill-suited, especially considering the interconnected outlook of the Chinese, whom some in the West continue to misunderstand.
Also, people there don't look at them with any kind of disgust. They dump everything on them and so on. At the same time, technologically much more developed than the same Western European countries said that this is their own. The future in which they have already found themselves, and many have not yet found themselves. They see the world evolving. It is based on this unity of destiny. That is, to some extent, of course, about equality, about mutual responsibility and so on. Could you tell them something? Who has a gadget? Who has artificial intelligence? Who has 7G? The cat will rule the world, and I know who would say that, and you know Yevgeny and our audience who would say that, definitely, because they have already said that. Same with the Soviet Union. And from their point of view, it should have been said in the 50s and 60s, when the space breakthrough was made, that those who are in space will rule the planet, those main ones exclusively and so on. But neither the Soviet Union then nor China now said anything like that. They said, otherwise, space is for peaceful development. It is for everyone. It is not for those who broke through there first, but it is for everyone. And let's develop it. It is on these peaceful foundations of cooperation that the Chinese speak now. They took a lot from us. It seems to me that they also took this, let's look at our planet as a community with a common destiny. You can treat it however you like. You can add something, you can come up with the essence, it doesn't matter, but this is important because from the other side, this is exactly the Western European, Anglo-Saxon, and so on. We hear every time in any historical era exactly the opposite, that whoever snatched it is right. Sorry, I'll quote this Russian meme K, who got up in the morning, who got up earlier, has slippers, and not even the phrase, whoever gets up early, God gives him, because there is something divine in this phrase. It's not about what you are. I took it yours, and you will dispose of it. But what else is there? A higher will? No, they don't seem to take it into account. Every time they talk about dominance, I beg you, about power, about taking away, selection in all senses of the word. Here's the answer to your question. Probably, if you think you need to clarify something, I will be happy to do so.
I understand, I clarify, it's not here. It seems to me that everything is so obvious here.
So it's not today. It's not about them being proud that they deceived us. So that's where I think, I guess I don't know, but I can imagine a lot about that too. I think that's probably why Merkel said it. She likely aimed to justify their decisions or lack of action, their failure to act sooner, their choice to remain passive, framing it as if offering an explanation. They took such a position, I am more than sure that admitting this, she was not so much offensive or proud of something as she was justifying herself.
Well, the fact that this is their subculture is what they get, and this is now visible. They have not gotten rid of this sorry family mark of their own, although they had everything possible to carry.
From this psychological trauma which has been with them for centuries, they have not outgrown it, they have not worked it, they have not closed it. Gestalt is a fact. They are endlessly toying with this idea of inequality as something that they believe comes from above, and that they, missionaries, everything else is their sphere of activity, and therefore they have the right and the rest should, as it were, submit to their will. Where is it written? It was only written in that very Bible. For here you said Negroes, and thank God in our country we say this word without any reservations, because we never had a slave trade and never have.
There was no discrimination. On the contrary, there was always surprise. We are not interested in such people. Oh, how, what to see? Yes, to clarify, well, somewhere probably there with humor. They're like thoughts in relation to yourself, with what humor, yes. Then in relation to others, even with great humor, but never. There was no humiliation, no insult anywhere. So thank God we can pronounce this word without a shadow of false embarrassment.
They published the same historical fact, the so-called Bible for Negroes, in Britain.
Absolutely.
Yes, in England, well, an ideal story that characterizes them in order to not well.
Not everyone is ready to be imbued with the true meaning there. Well, they considered religion, the Bible, Christianity as a tool. But even in this sense, well, it was possible to somehow preserve at least the holy description, not completely calmly. In the printing houses of London, I think it was the 18th century, so-called Bibles were published, which were intended for slaves. They were not even called for nicks, but for slaves.
What does that mean? All the passages that talked about human freedom?
On equality.
About equality, inequality, that all people are the same, about equality before God, they were removed, simply cut out, not printed, etc. When glued there, since it is necessary there just that the word slaves is, there is, so to speak, the master is, there is to receive sign. All this has not been reworked, not even obsolete, and the name has not been reworked. I don't know how long or what they have to live. To what disgrace? And this, of course, is a shame that you are doing to them. This is an outrageous shame, and this is scary. By the way, America must be given credit. She understands this shame. And this society is different, it is woven differently and is played differently, but this feeling of shame is what they have done over the past decades. Germans have this feeling of shame because there is East Germany, because there are Germans who are enlightened, because there are Germans who are not anti-fascists. These are, so to speak, notes that mean they simply receive grants there for promoting the topic of the Holocaust and so on, who truly know what happened. Then they fight against all manifestations of Nazism, nationalism, fascism, and so on, they live with shame. It starts a little bit in different countries. Part of French society, I can't say at all that it's very difficult for me to judge. I don't have the figures, but part of enlightened society is the military, it's the people. Scientists are people with their families' histories. They live with a sense of shame, of course, now for what is happening and for their fault and for their complicity in this, for the fact that they do not have the opportunity as they believe, but in fact they simply do not have the strength, no courage. This is no courage, probably. In some sense, courage is a French word. Yes, as you said, you call things by their names, what we have. Despite everything, and yes, they live with this. This oppression is already oppression. This is already under the press. They're coming here. Can we stay here? Of course, yes, you can.
I know.
Of course, we will always read everything to everyone.
Hence the victory.
We don't forget, but we forgive.
Glory shall be ours.
Zhenya is a victory, a multi-stage victory, first of all, which to some extent has already taken place because their plan was different for us. They were betting on just those. Then I turned the avatar upside down and wrote a curse. Those who left, including laughing, and those who did not leave, they bet on them. They formed some so-called battalions there. Well, of course, there is no, you are not organized, ideological, and the plan was 100%, of course, to return quickly within a couple of months. So the cry was thrown at companies, financial corporations, banks, firms, brands. Nobody would have left if they knew they were leaving for a long time. They were leaving for a short time. That's why they didn't preserve their stores, their companies. They didn't do anything like that. I know it. They should have returned to them as promised by those who own them. Under the press, forced to leave, they were to return within a few months on the white horse of the winner. They were to enter Moscow. Peter to Yekaterinburg, to other cities as ideological dominants. How are these? How are they exceptional? Who once again, so to speak, had to show their, so to speak, strength and teach us to live again. And we would have to occupy not just our previous areas of the site, they would have to take everything the best so that it was ready for this moment. This is even a doubt. There are no. You can't even imagine. You can't imagine how they are still crawling into our market for 2 years. You can't even imagine their landing troops here, so to speak, there under the cover of night, how to master, how to return, and how they return, and under what brands, under what names, and who, how, and who, and through the internet, who through neighboring countries, who from underground. If only, but for many this is already a closed option, as for example, of course. I think that the representatives of the German car industry are tearing their last hair out.
I would be too.
Now I heard Volkswagen's statement a month ago, Mercedes' statement that they are giving part of their production capacity to militaristic projects, that is. They give it to the production of weapons and so on. What to do with them, which segment is lost, what a colossal market, not only for finished products, but most importantly for services and advertising. Income, and given that these companies had an absolutely diversified form of presence, how much did they lose and how instantly?
Everything was filled with the car industry of other manufacturers who...
We know which ones?
To conclude, I'll mention one last example. It was quite remarkable, likely tied to events around 2022 or 2023 involving coordination with the project.
Representatives of various spheres of Western business have just left Russia, so to speak. And we were sitting at some event at the Chinese intermission, and they had some kind of banquet. And so we were sitting at the table, and I read the news. There is a tape that a company that produces elevators, a Western company, is leaving the Russian market. Well, yes, they are everything. They still braved it then. Well, yes, first they left 15. How many media companies? Do you know what the story was? Sometime around March 20th, statements flooded in from media corporations mimicking a pattern set by Western counterparts, declaring their permanent exit from Russia. The trend was intriguing and coordinated. BBC and Reuters and everyone else, with my colleagues, I'm calling and I'm saying, please tell me they've already left. Says no. I'm saying, well, maybe they reported something before they were going. I say, well, they're not going. We'll gather them. I'm gathering everyone. Who made their headquarters? I collect such statements in our department from representatives of head offices or leading correspondents. Well, who was it? I say, hello, good afternoon, Gutana Bendis. So to speak, bonjour would like to clarify in your corporation, and I list both the headquarters and the presidents have made appropriate statements that you are leaving Russia forever. Follow-up inquiries included specifics about their accreditation certificates and visa cancellations. The responses were uncertain and evasive, leading to an awkward silence. She says, oh, someone started fidgeting, someone here has already found the phone and apparently started writing instructions there to their headquarters, but they didn't distribute them, but the silence was broken by one Western agency, which said, you know, we're not going to leave yet. I say, no, wait a minute, but what then we heard, and then it was said brilliantly, and this is what our press service says. They said, here's the dichotomy, where is it? No one left, only the Western news agencies are sitting somewhere nearby. They are trying to pile up the speakers. They work in the information field all the same, only as if, so that Russian legislation does not apply to them. Everyone stays, everyone works, everything. That is the price of this issue. But here it is. Returning to the topic of systems corporation leaving, it means at the table during some big event in Chinese enterprise, and I read, say, oh, here a Western corporation that produces elevators said, now solemnly, that it is leaving the Russian market and that the Russian market will never survive this loss. Our Chinese friends say that, what am I saying? Well, they say that without Western elevators, our economy cannot survive. How they laughed, our Chinese comrades, how funny they were. Well, now it's like,
Well,
We're on
street Volkswagen and
Mercedes.
yes, they give part of their production capacity to projects of the military industrial complex. I don't think it was their dream. I think they didn't count on it and they didn't want it. And if only they were 22 years old by their politicians, who of course forced them to leave, would have told them that these corporations would have done everything they could to prevent it from happening.
that is, either I think they would demand incredible guarantees from those who undermine them for this, that is compensation, and given that they have long lost, so to speak, their voice, in elevated tones in relation to their older brother, they would, of course, either
simply ask for some such compensation here and now, or they would never leave. And I think they would never leave. They were simply deceived. Therefore, when Merkel stated that they were cheating, pretending that they were performing, the Minsk agreements, I think, are the next recognition. And not only it should be in how much they deceived the citizens of France in their own countries.
This example, shared with colleagues and journalists, truly stands out as brilliant and insightful. These illustrations reinforce the concept that a spoken word cannot be taken back, much like a sparrow that has taken flight. For the finale, every detail was discussed. The word has flown and there's no retrieving it. Thank you sincerely, Maria, for your contributions.
Thank you.